back. Amazing to see this packed auditorium for obvious reasons. Yesterday, a few views about the UK government's policy on climate were expressed vociferously. Others may have views which they kept to themselves. But the reason so many of you here now is you want to hear from someone who we all assume will play a leading role in a party that may form the next government. Sooner, later, we're all waiting for that outcome. So we're about to hear from the Labour leader on climate, Ed Miliband. He's going to give a speech for about 10 minutes, and then the two of us are going to be sitting there, and I will endeavor to put the questions that I'm going to imagine you'd all like to put to him. And some of you actually have submitted questions in advance, and I will try to reflect those in the conversation. Would you join me in welcoming Ed Miliband to the stage?
Well, David and friends, thank you so much for that introduction, and it is great to be here at what I can only describe as the Glastonbury for energy nerds. And as a self-confessed energy nerd, obviously I'm delighted to be here. This, I think, is the pyramid stage. And David, I think you're in the legend slot. Sorry to say that. Look, it is great to be here, and you get an incredible sense of energy and excitement as you walk around these amazing exhibits. And so, first of all, thank you to all of the businesses who are here and exhibiting here, and you make me excited about what we can achieve together. So my starting point is this, which is we face a burning platform, not just on the climate crisis, but on energy insecurity in our country. And I think there is a tendency in politics to almost wish away the last couple of years and what has happened. And I think we should have two numbers etched in our minds: 6 million and 94 billion. 6 million, the number of people in fuel poverty as a result of the cost of living crisis that we have seen over the last 2 years, and 94 billion pounds, the amount of money that government had to shell out to try and prevent this crisis from its worst effects. And it's a crisis that's not over for people across our country, including in my constituency. Now, the truth about both the cost of living crisis and the climate crisis, as people in this room know, is it's caused by our dependence on fossil fuels and our exposure to fossil fuel markets controlled by petrostates and dictators. And every day we remain so exposed is another day when families and our economy are at risk. The reason I say all this is, for us, clean energy is the way to end the cost of living crisis once and for all. We believe it's the route to energy independence, to lower bills, and indeed it is the greatest economic opportunity of the 21st century. That's why making Britain a clean energy superpower is one of Keir Starmer's 5 missions for government. And we want to partner with you to make this happen. And so today I want to issue an invitation to all of the businesses here to be part of this shared mission, because we need you if we are to succeed as a country. But you have a right to ask us, well, if you want to be our partners, what do you offer, including what do you offer that the current government doesn't? And I just want to briefly set that out to you. First, we offer a clear North Star for policy. If I'm the Secretary of State after the next general election, we know what our North Star will be, which is 2030 clean power, all of our power coming from zero carbon sources, and accelerating towards decarbonisation across the economy. Now, some people ask me, why the hurry? Why the ambition? And it's very simple. It's for the reasons that I set out. Every day we fail to meet clean power is another day of higher bills and energy insecurity for Britain. And of course it's challenging, as I'm sure I'll discuss with David. If it was easy, it would have happened by now. But we believe the biggest risk to our country is not too much ambition, but too little, delay and denial. Second, we don't just offer consistency or clarity of mission, we offer consistency of mission. Yesterday, as David said, you had the Secretary of State here, and she said this, and I quote, she wanted to take on a great untruth that the thing that business needs most from government is certainty. Well, I profoundly disagree with the Secretary of State. I think uncertainty is terrible for business and terrible for our country. I think uncertainty is the enemy of investment. I think it raises costs and it damages jobs and wealth creation. As Beverly Conaby, director of the Corporate Leaders Group, said yesterday, we know what businesses in fact need most of all is certainty. UK growth is being hampered by constantly changing policy. I agree with Beverly. And we will have a different approach from this government. We know what our North Star will be, and we will pursue it consistently. And what do I mean by that? No more capricious, arbitrary policy decisions, like banning onshore wind in England, which has raised bills by an average of £180 for every family in the country. No more sudden junking of the timetable for the ICE phase-out. No more ruling out technologies because of ideology. We need nuclear, we need wind, we need solar, we need hydrogen, we need carbon capture, we need tidal, every power source at this conference and every power source at our disposal. Third, we won't just be consistent, but we'll be a government with a clear plan that works to unleash the private investment that is essential for the country. Your ingenuity, dynamism, investment is what will deliver clean power for the country. But it simply won't happen unless government does its job, setting a direction of travel and breaking down the barriers to its pursuit. And this is where I think we need to take on what I call the four horsemen of the apocalypse. Grid delays, planning delays, supply chain problems, and skills gaps. And we see them all over. So we will set timetables of months, not years, for the different aspects of the planning process. On grid, we will use our new public entity, GB Energy, to convene the transmission operators to speed up procurement. On skills, we will reform the apprenticeship levy to help fill the gaps we face. And on supply chains, we will partner with you to build up our domestic capacity. Fourth, alongside this commitment to break down barriers, we will also invest public resources to help catalyze the private investment we need as a country. This is for us a crucial point, which is public investment doesn't need to crowd out private investment, but can crowd it in, as we've seen from the US. If we want to lead in the technologies of tomorrow, government must play its part in investing today. That's why, for example, we'll set up GB Energy, our new publicly owned energy company, to partner with the private sector, investing in technologies like floating offshore wind. We'll have a new national wealth fund capitalized at over £7 billion to invest, for example, in our ports so they can accommodate the enormous wind turbines that we can manufacture in the UK. And with our Warm Homes plan, we'll oversee the biggest investment in home decarbonisation this country has ever seen. Fifth and finally, and in a sense this is the most important thing I can say to you today, if Labour is in power, this mission, one of Keir Starmer's 5 missions, will be a whole government effort, involving every government department. Because I hear the same thing from businesses up and down the country. Consultations delayed for months and even years, decisions bouncing around Whitehall unresolved, and political will absent to get problems unblocked. We will end this situation. The whole of government will be laser focused on this mission. 2030 will have the authority of the Prime Minister if Labour wins the election and the enthusiastic support of the Chancellor. That is why the mission and its ambition matters for us so much, because it can drive the change we need. Let me end on this point. Over 20 years, we have built agreement across our society that climate action is not just the right thing to do ethically, but the right thing for our economy. That consensus, that agreement, was rooted in facts, evidence, and the world we confront today. That agreement has been hard won and hard fought, and I know is shared by people in this room. I played my own role helping build that agreement, that broad agreement, as Energy Secretary in the late 2000s. That's why I've got to say I deeply regret the turn of the Conservative Party in recent months away from that consensus. When I hear people who speak for the Conservative Party, I feel they misjudge badly where the public and business are. They've sent the wrong message to investors and the country with their anti-net zero rhetoric, as the former Prime Minister, Theresa May, said yesterday. And the sad truth is that Conservatives have become the doomsters and defeatists with their stance on net zero. And I believe that doomsterism and defeatism is not just anti-climate, it's anti-business, it's anti-worker, it's anti-consumer. We have a different approach. I think clean energy is a huge opportunity for Britain. I believe we can achieve lower bills, good jobs, energy independence, and do the right thing by future generations. And to return to where I started, and to conclude on this point, we need everyone in this room if we are to succeed. On a personal note, I came back into frontline politics in 2020 because of this issue. Keir Starmer rightly says, country first, party second. More than any other, I believe this issue goes beyond normal party politics. So I don't care which party you support or which sector you are in. My message is, if you have good ideas before or after the election, I want to work with you. A truly national mission, government, business, civil society, and citizens. I think the stakes are too high to do anything else. This is a moment in history where we will all be judged on how we respond, and rightly so. I know many of you believe that too, and I hope to have the opportunity to work with you in the months and years ahead to make the vision I have set out a reality. Thank you very much.
Or when people ask me, what do I think a future Labour government would do? What about the 28 billion thing? What happened there, and what are you left with? Because obviously you were an advocate for that scale of
look, I think it's pretty simple, David, which is we looked at the fiscal inheritance we were likely to face from the current government, and it meant that we couldn't meet our fiscal rules and stick to the 28 billion, so it was scaled back. But I think it's really important to say, and obviously that's disappointing, given it's arisen because of the inheritance that will be left if we win the election. But I think it's really important to say that when you look at the investment we are making, and I talked about it a little bit in my remarks, GB Energy, the National Wealth Fund, the Warm Homes Plan, the British Jobs Bonus, Local Power Plan, it's something like 23, 24 billion over the course of the Parliament, on top of what the government has already committed. That is very competitive per capita with what the Biden administration is spending in the US. Mm-hmm. So yes, it's less than we originally promised, but do I think it's a very substantial commitment that can make a massive difference, a transformative difference to jobs and lower bills and so on? Absolutely I do.
Because I sort of sense the audience here and many people beyond really would welcome what you said about strategic certainty. That the last thing you want is this, as you described it, capricious dropping or changing of policies. But I have to say, a lot of people thought, well, hang on, there was a plan, the 28 billion, now there isn't. What does that say? What would you say to people to convince them that actually you are poised to offer strategic certainty?
Because at the moment, we are not in control of our destiny in some sense, because it's this government that is in power. And so we have, since Liz Truss's mini budget, long-term interest rates went up significantly. Jeremy Hunt declared that he was going to use up all the fiscal headroom there was. So I think what this audience knows is we have to build the future on fiscal responsibility. And when you look at in a very constrained set of circumstances, much more constrained than we would have anticipated 2 or 3 years ago, the single biggest commitment we're making is in this area of the green energy transformation. I think that says something important about the commitment of Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves. If we win the election, we will have the most committed, and I've been around this for a bit, the most committed Prime Minister and Chancellor when it comes to these issues in our history.
Let's drill into a few specifics. Great welcome, I think, for your thoughts about unlocking grid connections, planning, speeding all that up? Because that came up with Greg Jackson earlier and repeatedly during the course of the last couple of days. Actually, what can you do and how quickly?
Well, look,
I mean, you set a 6-year deadline for decarbonising the power sector. With the best will in the world, is it actually realistic
to
think you can change
the
planning and the grid connection system in that time?
It absolutely is. And look, I think the reality is, and I'm sort of glad you asked me about this, the current government has a 2035 target for decarbonisation and 95% by 2030. But there is zero focus on it, I'm afraid, from ministers and in government. And we have deliberately set a stretching target, one that Chris Stark, the outgoing head of the CCC, the Climate Change Committee, says is achievable, something that the National Energy System Operator has said is achievable, in order to break these log jams. And we absolutely can, as I said, by setting clear timetables on planning, by working with National Grid, with SSE and Scottish Power on commissioning the kit we need, which is and GB Energy is going to play a role in that, which is a massive issue for getting these things built. And the other thing that my team is doing, given the stretching timetable, we're going to be day one ready to go. And
you say that, Ed, but I mean, I'm thinking if you're going to set up GB Energy, that's not a day, that doesn't arrive on day 2, does it? I mean, that's...
Well, look, it's not for me to anticipate the parliamentary timetable, but this is a very big priority. It will be an early priority to legislate for. Okay. It can be set up in shadow form. But I think there's a sort of wider issue here. I walk around this conference and I see innovators, I see people who are incredibly ambitious, and I don't see that being matched by government. And I think there is a defeatism here that we've got to avoid. People told Patrick Vallance that he couldn't develop a vaccine for COVID in anything like the time scale that he did, but they did it in 10 months. They told Germany they couldn't build the LNG terminals, and they did. I think we've got to show that Britain can do big things and can do it with focus. And that is what we're going to do. And I think it's an incredibly exciting prospect.
What about unlocking onshore wind? Greg Jackson has the idea, which other countries have done before, of regional pricing or community benefits if they host
Definitely,
a wind
we need,
farm.
look, this is one of the things, by the way, to unlock the planning system. Every community that hosts clean energy infrastructure should have mandated community benefit, in my view. Every regulator that is responsible for this should have a net zero mandate so that the regulators recognize the importance of driving forward. We'll look at the issues around zonal pricing, and it's obviously something we'll need to consider. There are complicated issues there. But on the onshore wind ban, look, this will be one of our first acts if we win the election. I just want to say on this onshore wind issue, we're in a quite remarkable situation, not in a good way, where it is easier to build an incinerator than it is to build an onshore wind farm in England. The Resolution Foundation, as I said earlier, I'm a nerd, so I strongly recommend the Resolution Foundation's report recently on this. The onshore wind ban is costing the poorest households in the country 6 times more than the richest households in the country because they spend a higher proportion of their income on electricity. So let's not have this rubbish from the anti-net zero brigade that they are somehow the defenders of working people. They are the people who are doing in working people with things like the onshore wind ban, and we're going to change it.
How are you going to accelerate the deployment of offshore wind, which took a big knock because of supply chain, bottlenecks, inflation?
Yeah.
You talk about new ports or expanding ports. I mean, none of that is quick, is it? Well, it's not all in your hands, anyway.
My rule on this is that where a process is working, and I think the auction process has brought considerable benefits, we should continue with it. But we, of course, are in discussions with the industry about how we can accelerate this. I think, I'll be honest with you, part of this, and I suspect lots of people in the room will sympathize with this, is the Treasury has got to be at the heart of this project of achieving net zero and decarbonisation. Because it strikes me that what's happened in the setting of the budget for AR6, and indeed in the fiasco of AR5, is that the government sort of cut off its nose to spite its face. I mean, basically what happened is by cutting off the supply of offshore wind originally, and the fear is by restricting the supply in the latest auction, we are literally going to raise bills for everybody. But for sort of incredibly and there's a very complicated issue to do with the modeling, but the basis on which it's been done is on modeling that suggests an incredibly artificially low price of gas in the future, which then has sort of restricted the budget of the auction. So, I think part of this is government has no plan. And because it doesn't really have a plan, and because 2035 isn't really a plan, there's no forcing mechanism, and I've been in government and I've seen this, there's no forcing mechanism to drive government to make these decisions which are in the long-term interests of the country, and that's one of the things we want to change.
In power, you would be able to set the financial framing, for example,
exactly.
for offshore wind.
Exactly.
But back to supply chains, what can you do? I mean, anything about improving a port is taking years, isn't it?
Take the ports. Investing 1.8 billion, which is what we're committed to as part of our National Wealth Fund in our ports, the biggest investment since privatization, is absolutely a way to unlock that. But you see, there's an interesting point about this, which is when I talk to business about constructing these supply chains, part of the problem is that the uncertainty means there is no line of sight for business in terms of setting up the factories and having the orders. And that is the other thing that we've got to change. We've got to, see, I think part of the problem of policy is it also hasn't been set with any sense in mind of what is a proper industrial policy that we can get the benefits from this offshore wind energy boom. Because let's be honest, we're the second biggest generator of offshore wind, but we are not second biggest when it comes to the jobs in offshore wind. And that is because there hasn't been an industrial policy strategy behind it.
Let's talk about electric cars.
Yeah.
Big plank of, this government, I know it's delayed the date for the phase out, as you mentioned, big theme for you. Right now, in China, 1 in every 2 cars sold is electric. BYD are offering a model for $6,000. Are cheap Chinese electric cars welcome here? Or would a future Labour government, to protect the British car industry, want tariffs?
Well, these are complicated questions.
So there's a trade-off of jobs versus
These are complicated questions. I'm not going to sort of make policy on the hoof on this. I think it's really important to invest in our car industry, and one of the things that we want to do with our National Wealth Fund is invest in our car industry. I mean, look, it's not just BYD that is bringing down prices, it's other companies too. And I was at an amazing company called Petalite yesterday in the West Midlands that is producing a different model for charging points. And they have real confidence that we're going to see crossover in the next few years when it comes to the upfront cost of electric cars and petrol and diesel cars. And I think it's a very good example of where the government's rollback has been disastrous, because it's sent a signal of incredible uncertainty to consumers, to business. Now, actually, most of business is just carrying on producing its electric cars on the original timetable, but it's exactly that kind of uncertainty that we need to avoid.
But there is a trade-off, isn't there? In climate terms, you would welcome a tsunami of cheap Chinese electric cars. In industrial policy terms, jobs terms, benefits of net zero terms, you would obviously want to find a way of nurturing.
The thing is, I have confidence in our car manufacturers because I've had the discussions with them that they can produce affordable electric cars, and we are already seeing this in the UK, and I think we're going to see a lot more of it.
So you've sort of, okay, let's see. I mean, I personally don't think that the European car makers have understood what they're being hit by in terms of the staggering cost reductions of electric cars there. What about a few other sort of specifics? Very nice scheme in France where they have said any large car park must be half covered by solar panels. And it's provided a fantastic boost to that industry.
We will say more about this in the coming months. But I am very, I'm in favour of. I don't share the sort of anti-ground-mounted solar view. which I think is mainly based on mythology, to be absolutely honest. But I definitely think we should make much more use of rooftops, including rooftops when it comes to commercial buildings. And you've got to do that in a way that is going to work for businesses and indeed for consumers. But I think, and I'm not just saying this because Greg was on the stage just now, but I think we are still underestimating the extent to which, of course you need to build the grid, and that's really important, but decentralized energy, we're in the foothills of what decentralized energy can achieve for our country. Batteries, solar, heat pumps, there's a huge opportunity here, and actually a huge opportunity to put consumers in control, EVs, huge opportunity to put consumers actually in control, to give consumers greater control, not less control.
So let's pick up a few of the questions that people have submitted in the last few weeks. So one is about specifically with business, and you've talked about how you can't deliver net zero without involving business and people in this room and so forth. What specifically can you do to incentivize business to make the right choices?
Look, I think that
probably a treasury question, but what would you like to see happen?
Well, look, part of, sadly you're not Rachel Reeves, so I can't have this discussion quite in the way I would like to, but we do have these discussions. Yeah. Look, part of what we want to do, and I don't want to sort of anticipate, exactly sort of the processes here, part of what we want to do is have a much closer alignment between the Treasury and the Department of Net Zero. Rachel and I have worked incredibly closely together on these issues over the last 4 years. If we are in government together, we will do the same. And I think there is much more opportunity for there to be institutional cooperation on this. Because I think that at the moment, the Treasury, I actually don't think this is sort of fair to say this is a civil service issue, because I think the civil servants in the Treasury really get this. But I think politically, unless the Treasury and DESNZ are much more closely aligned, and of course that applies to all of these regulatory and other issues, it's not going to work. So sort of, even though you're not Rachel Reeves, be assured that Rachel Reeves and I are working closely together on this.
What about something that came up in our discussion about trying to unlock finance to bridge the gap, either for innovative tech startups to deliver net zero, or for plans that are ready but don't quite get the bankers behind them, is changing the fiduciary duties that boards have to make sure that, above all else, shareholders are rewarded, rather than taking into account what's loosely called ESG?
Well, look, we have committed to have 1.5 degree aligned transition plans for all large companies and major financial institutions. So in other words, not just transparency, but
imposed somehow? Or
well, not imposed, but it'll be a requirement for companies. This is what Mark Carney and others have recommended, but the government has gone slow on this, to have transition plans for how they're going to be 1.5.
What a legal obligation to have a transition plan.
Indeed.
What if they don't?
Well, I think they will. People tend to comply with the rule, with their responsibilities. And if you talk to somebody like Amanda Blanca at Aviva or Mark Carney, who are on our task force on the National Wealth Fund, they think this is incredibly important to build on Britain's reputation on green finance and to get finance flowing in the right way. But look, the other thing is, we have a view that government finance, the billions of government finance, can also help crowd in the tens of billions of private finance. And institutions like the British Business Bank, the UK Infrastructure Bank are really important to this. If I make an observation about the UKIB, I think they're great people running the UKIB, but I don't think they're part of any broad conversation about where government's strategic priorities lie. And I think I read Claire Coutinho's speech yesterday, and obviously I disagree with it, but there's one particular point, which is this isn't about government doing things that the private sector should be doing. It's about government setting the framework and and making interventions where there is market failure to help the private sector do what it is best at. And I think building that genuine partnership is what I would hope we can do.
We're into the last minute, and I shouldn't really have left this topic till the end, but let's keep it brief. Adaptation, dreadful word, but we are living with a more hostile climate right now, and typically governments find it quite hard to join up the different elements of that. DEFRA looks after wildfires, the Home Office looks after the fire brigade, somebody else looks after the water supply. What would a Labour government do to actually prepare the country, not for the future, but actually for the present?
Well, look, my observation will be this, is that adaptation is basically somewhat of an orphan in government at the moment, and has been for a long time. It sits in DEFRA, there is a cabinet office role. I don't want to anticipate any sort of machinery of government issues, that's not a matter for me. But I think whatever the solution is, we've got to make sure that there is proper ownership around adaptation as a country. In a sense, it's the thing that government, there's lots of things that government delays, but it's the thing that government tends to leave off the end, and then you get huge costs like flooding. I've seen it in my constituency in Doncaster, and it has terrible effects and terrible financial effects. So giving adaptation a much bigger priority in government and making sure it's properly owned and given proper priority, absolutely, you're pushing an open door on that.
Okay. Look, I got through about a quarter of my questions. I got through a handful of the ones that you've all submitted. I can sort of sense that there were probably millions more questions out there. I hope I've raised many of the ones you'd have wanted me to ask, but we have run out of time.
Can I just say one thing at the end, just to go over time? You know, some people see the challenges we face on climate as daunting, and of course they are daunting, but I have to say I feel they're incredibly energizing as well. And I think there is such an opportunity, and I always say this, but I think it's really important to say this, we collectively in this room are in the better lives business. Don't listen to those people who say we are somehow the opponents of better lives. With lower bills, with great tech in your home, with energy independence, with good jobs, and fulfilling our obligations to future generations.
And clean air.
And clean air, thank you very much, you're hired. We are absolutely in the better lives business, and I think that is what is so exciting about what we can achieve.
Fantastic. Ed, many, many thanks indeed.
Thank you very much.